The awful conditions of South Carolina's roads has been the subject of ongoing debate for the past several years. Most recently, South Carolina's new governor, Henry McMaster, proposed petitioning President Trump for federal dollars to fund the state's infrastructure needs. While federal funding may be one option, South Carolina state legislators have invested time in exploring all options available to the state. One of the most outspoken legislators was the late Representative Joe Neal, a progressive representative from Hopkins who has been an ardent environmentalist and an advocate for people across the state. The untimely passing of Representative Neal leaves a mark on all who knew him, but his legacy remains in the causes for which he fought. We had the honor of sitting down with Representative Neal prior to the start of the 2017 legislative session and discussed the complex problems of fixing South Carolina's roads and possible steps that lawmakers should consider. Neal, how you doing today?
I'm well. How about yourself?
I can't complain. Wanted to take some time and, if you could, explain to our viewers about the road situation. South Carolina legislature has been going on and on, back and forth, about how do we fund the roads. So could you kind of give us an overview or what are some of the obstacles that we face in getting the roads funded?
First, let me give a little bit of history. Right now, South Carolina has the fourth largest road system in the nation, which is really exceptional for a small state like this. The fourth largest road system in the nation, and we're one of the poorest states in the nation. That's a bad combination. What happens now is that our roads over the last 40 years have simply degraded to a point that we don't have the resources to keep up the entire network, at least not the way that we should, to improve it and upgrade it. What we're striving to do right now, frankly, is just to maintain it where it is and not let it degrade any further, to try and keep it minimally safe. The cost of upgrading all of our roads in South Carolina is going to be about $20 billion. Now, keep in mind, our entire state budget is only, $7 billion a year, which means that even if we took $1 billion a year, it would take 20 years to do all the roads in the state. Then we'd have to start over again, because by then, they would begin to already would have begun to degrade. Okay? It's a never-ending cycle. The problem for us is that we don't have the resource. Two things have happened. Last year, the House of Representatives passed a measure for roads that would have created a 10 cents per gallon tax on gasoline that would have generated a little more than $400 million that could be used to begin this process of repairing our roads. However, the governor and the South Carolina Senate disagreed. And they passed a version, the Senate passed a version, that did not include a gas tax. Instead, they were calling for pulling the $400 million straight from the general fund. What that means, and that's every year going forward, that means that $400 million every year, forever, would be taken out of the general fund to put into roads. The problem with that is that, it means that there would be a $400 million cut to state agencies and state services across the board. That would be pretty tough, because a lot of these agencies are operating on a shoestring budget as it is. But that's a $400 million, almost a $500 million cut that would have to come out of this $7 billion budget that we have. Now, keep in mind there are other costs that are being taken out of that budget as well. Right now, there are about $700 million a year that's coming out for tax cuts in our budget. So you add that $700 million tax cut to $400 million for the roads coming out of the general fund, and that's $1.1 billion of a $7 billion budget. So that's 1/7 of our entire budget that's going to either tax cuts or roads. That doesn't begin to address issues of education and access to health care It doesn't begin to talk about services through agencies like mental health and corrections and law enforcement and the rest of that. Right? It means that this state would be severely strapped in order to do that, particularly in years that are not good economic years. This year has been a real problem in regard to that because we had a surplus. We had roughly $1 billion surplus. So it wasn't much of a problem this year to do that. The problem is going to be in the years when there is not a surplus, when there isn't a surplus and you have to start cutting into services and jobs and the like, education and healthcare. That's going to be a problem. So that's kind of where we are right now. The public wants these roads repaired. But personally, I think we ought to pay for it. There are no free rides. You can decide that we'll just take it from the general fund, but you should understand that what that eventually will mean is cuts in education and healthcare and other valuable and scarce services provided by state government. And if you're willing to have cuts there, particularly to the most vulnerable populations in the state, then that will be your choice. I tend not to agree with that. I think we ought to pay our way. South Carolina has not raised its gas tax since the 1980s. And as a result, we're far behind our fellow states in terms of generating funds for roads. I don't think you can get to where we want to go in terms of road repair without a gas tax.
Okay, let me ask you this. There seems to be a difference of opinion, like there always is, between how Republicans want to go about doing it and how Democrats want to go about doing it. Can you briefly, in layman's terms, give to me what is the Republicans' solution for paying for it and versus the Democratic solution for paying?
The Republicans have generally taken the position of no new taxes at all. And while that may sound good, oftentimes from my perspective, it's just not practical. When you're faced with an issue like roads in this state, a $20 billion price tag, there's no way we could take enough out of the state budget to do these roads. And as these roads continue to degrade, ultimately we're talking about public safety. Do we have to wait until roads start collapsing and people are killed before we look at this in a more macro, holistic approach in terms of finding the resources to do what has to be done? This is about whether or not our infrastructure in the state is going to be healthy and support the kind of trade and traffic that we need it to support. If we continue to play games and continue to kick the can down the road, so to speak, and just put Band-Aids on it, it ultimately will catch up to us, and we'll have that in the form of failures of our infrastructure at a level that's going to be catastrophic and frankly embarrassing.
Yeah, so the Democratic solution is?
We think that for those things that are critical, we need to pay for them. The public, I think, is willing to do that. If we want to have safe roads, we have to pay for it. I'm in favor of raising a gas tax and finding other fees to generate resources to pave these roads. We cannot continue to watch these roads degrade. Now, one of the features that this bill that we passed in the House had was this. We had $132 million in that budget for roads that were to go to primarily secondary roads in the rural communities. That money in the budget in the House that passed was shifted to what they call primary roads, which are primarily urban roads, which means there won't be much money available to rural communities to keep those roads up or pave new roads. Particularly maintaining those secondary roads is going to be a real problem without that $132 million.
How close are we to having a compromise on this road bill?
Well, there will be a conference committee between the House and the Senate to work out differences between the House and the Senate bill. But frankly, those bills are not that far apart. They're very similar. Some of the minutiae may be different, but the general themes and macro issues of those bills are pretty much the same. The revenue comes out of the general fund, and where it goes from there is the issue. There may be some differences in how the Senate uses that money coming out And what it includes in that, the House has the $400 million coming out of the general fund plus 132 coming out of the C fund, right, from secondary roads to primary roads. The Senate may not have that. So it'll be differences like that the committee will have to negotiate.
Okay. Has there been any studies commissioned, and I'm sure there have, studies commissioned to find out how bad South Carolina roads are and where we are versus other states as far as the infrastructure?
Yeah, there are plenty of them. We're not in good shape. The reality is that our roads are in pretty bad shape and getting worse. The best we can hope for is to be able to bring those roads up to a minimum level of safety and try and keep that maintenance at a decent level. We don't have the resources to upgrade to a better quality of road. Money just isn't there. So the struggle right now is, do we even have the resources to maintain that minimal level of safety? And that's going to be what the $400 million is about. At some point, I believe, and this is my opinion, at some point we're going to have to make some hard decisions about what do we do to get these roads beyond where they are and up to another level of safety and capacity. Right now, we're watching what happened to the roads October 3rd with the floods. And we watched some major failures across the state. We had over 500 roads fail during that flood in South Carolina. More than 50 in my district alone in Lower Richland. And what that said was that many of the roads and bridges in this state are old, and they're built using older technologies. For example, some of the bridges that we're talking about. Let me give an example of one of the bridges on our Bluff Road here in Richland County. The center span of that bridge, one of these bridges, was 16 feet. That center span was built decades ago using an older technology that used wooden pylons to support it. The outer 4 feet on both sides was built using concrete and steel. The failure, guess what, was in the center, where most of the traffic is. And so we've had a number of bridges in Lower Richland to fail that way. And that's why we have 3 bridges out now that will be out for the next 6 months as they're being replaced. We had another that failed completely during the flood further down Bluff Road. We have others that are out and will be out for the foreseeable future until resources are at hand to try and bring those online. My point is, those older bridges built using older technologies will always be at risk when you have events like this flood, hurricanes, that kind of thing, that put unusual pressure on those structures. What we need is the resource to upgrade those bridges to steel and concrete, which can survive floods like the ones that we had. Because the flood did not take out the bridges in Lower Richland that were built from steel and concrete. The failures were the older technology bridges with wood and not steel and concrete. I think that illustrates what the public really needs to understand, that all things are not equal when you talk about roads and bridges. Because if you're talking about a higher level of survivability of those structures, it means that they have to be built from better materials, using better engineering. And some of these bridges are 50 years old or better, and they're still sitting there on wooden pylons. And so they're vulnerable. What we need in this state are the resources to go out and raise those bridges and those roads up to the highest level of safety possible so that they can withstand nature's fury when it does occur. And the public can have a better chance of surviving should they be caught on those roads in that kind of event. Where we are right now is we're playing kind of Russian roulette, in my view. We're trying to do what we can do with the money that we do have, knowing all the while it's not sufficient to raise these roads and bridges to the level that they need to be.
What can voters do to kind of help press upon their elected officials to get this road bill to come up with a compromise and get it taken care of?
You know, the question is, will the public support a tax, a fee to generate revenue to fix these roads? It's as simple as that. If the public continues to say, we don't want any new taxes, not even to fix the roads, then you get what you get. There's only so much you can do in a state budget as small as ours, in a state that has as many needs as we do. At some point, you're going to make some choices. That'll be very hard choices unless we come up with some more revenue. And that's kind of where we are.